Peace be with you. Welcome to the Institute of All Intelligent Life. We're having our fourth class today. This is Thursday, the 29th of September, 2016. My name is Alan Kiesler, and we're very happy to have you here. So I'm going to begin this class by answering one question, which I think is a very important question that somebody asked. Or it wasn't a question actually, it was a statement, but Sayyid Asim Mahmud said, according to religion, only God is eternal. Other than that, heavens and universes, dimensions, and time, all accidental, means created. So, yes, it's true that everything else is accidental, but accidental has a specific meaning, philosophical meaning, and that is that it is dependent on something else. At least in Greek philosophy, this word is used to indicate something that's dependent on something else. So just because something is called accidental, and I put that in quotation marks, accidental, it's not really accidental in the sense of happening without any plan, but it's accidental in the sense that it depends on something else. But that doesn't mean it cannot be eternal. So this is a very important concept to understand, that time, which we experience, does not exist in the eternal world. So when things happen there, we can't talk about them in the same way as we talk about acts that happen here within time. So actually it's a little, if you think about it a little bit, just meditate on this idea. If God were the only eternal and everything else which is created cannot be eternal, then what state did God exist in before he created? So there had to be many things in existence eternally. Otherwise there would have been a time, so-called time, when God was not God, because God means Malik, means master, means Lord. So there has to be somebody that God is the Lord of, or the master of. So there never was a time when other things did not exist which were dependent on God, but which were never created in time. So the eternal world that I was talking about yesterday and the day before, which I am calling the transdimensional world because it's all beyond all the dimensions of time and space that we experience here, that world is eternal. And just because they are accidental in the sense of being dependent upon God, it does not mean that they cannot be eternal. So I wanted to make that point very clear and then discuss a little bit more about the transdimensional existence. So the transdimensional existence is eternal, and it is beyond time and space. Time and space are realities that we experience here, and this time means, as I explained, things deteriorate, things fall apart. Whereas in the transdimensional world, things don't deteriorate. If anything, they develop further. So that may seem contrary to some people's idea of God as some sort of static something. But no, actually, even in the eternal world, things are developing. They are expanding. They are increasing. So this may seem like a contradiction to some people's minds, but that is really because of our own limitation. We think that because within the world of time things develop, therefore in the eternal world outside of time things cannot develop. But that actually is a less intelligent understanding of God and of the transdimensional existence. So everything happens there, but they don't deteriorate. That is the point I'm trying to make. And still they can be eternal and still be developing. And not only God, but the Isle of Paradise is the term that I'm using. That place, that residence of God also is eternal. And many different beings which are dependent upon God are also eternal. And there are eternal activities, and there is eternal development within that realm. So I just want to describe one, first you might say, development or creation, although it's not first in terms of time, but it's first in terms of dependence. So, as I mentioned earlier, the word or the name or the description that's given to God in the Law of One books is infinite intelligence, or intelligent infinity. So this is a primary characteristic of God, and I think there's no disagreement about this. Infinity, or infinite. God is unlimited in every way. And intelligence. This is a very, very important point. That some people have a concept of God, that God is just an energy or just a force, and is not intelligent. But that, again, is a concept that we may create due to our own limited mental concepts. That we think that because God is the origin of everything, therefore God cannot be like intelligent, or cannot be, because intelligent seems to mean an individual or a person. Well, the answer to that is, again, these are all things that are a little difficult for our minds to grasp, because our minds are very limited. But try to understand that God is intelligent. God must be intelligent, otherwise where does intelligence come from? Intelligence must be present in that original infinite existence. And that intelligence does imply, yes, personality, individuality, the ultimate individual, the original individual upon which everything else depends. So this is the first point that I want to emphasize now. As we're studying cosmology, we have to understand that the entire cosmos rests upon one, you can call it point if you want. It's not really one point in a limited sense, but one thing, one being, one entity from which everything else comes and upon which everything else depends. Now again, let me emphasize that when I say from which it comes, it doesn't mean that there was a time when it wasn't there and then it came. These original entities are all eternal, so there never was a time that they were created. They are eternally dependent upon the original God. So that God is the most important thing for us to understand, but it's very difficult to understand God. So it depends upon our own, not just mental acuity, not just being very smart or intelligent, but much more important, it depends upon the purity of our hearts. It depends upon our intention. What is our real purpose, our real intention? Is it to get something out of God, to use God for our purposes, to make God our servant? Dear God, give me this, give me that. So if that is our purpose, that's our intent, then it will be much more difficult to understand God. But if we have a pure heart, means not wanting anything from God in a selfish way. It's wanting to serve God, wanting to learn to love God, wanting to learn to love everything. With that intent, with that motivation, we can gradually come to understand God more and more. And that, in fact, is the purpose of not only human life, but that's really the purpose of existence, that we should come to know and to love God more and more, and to know and understand and love each other more and more, because we are all creatures of God. So there should be no separation between our idea that I can love God, but I won't love everybody else, because everybody else is also part of God's creation, so we have to love everyone and everything. in order to love God fully. So that is the primary understanding that we have to develop in order to understand this transdimensional existence, that by purity of heart, and there are many, many practices that we can engage in, and I'm going to talk about that in just a minute, but by practicing spiritual practices, we can purify our hearts and we can understand God and ourselves better and better. And the most important practice, this is pretty universal throughout different traditions, but the fundamental practice in many traditions is reciting names of God or reciting revealed verses and prayers. So, just to give the example of the big mistake I made yesterday, I'm a human being, I make mistakes, so I made a big mistake yesterday, not realizing, not being sensitive to the fact of how people would respond. And after my class, when I did the exercises, which I do every morning, I also chanted some prayers and some mantras. And some people were very offended by what I did. So I realized afterwards, and I was instructed also by my teacher, that that was a big mistake, and I realized, yes, I should be more sensitive to how people will respond to what I'm doing. So many people were offended that I was chanting the names of God, or I was reciting prayers from different religious traditions, and they didn't like the way I was mixing that up. So I'm going to refrain from doing that in the future. I'm very sorry, and I apologize to anyone who was offended by that. So I will continue to do the exercises, and of course I myself will continue to do that chanting and praying, but I won't put them together on my public videos anymore. So please forgive me for that. But this chanting of names of God is very, very important. In fact, when I was a child, my mother, as I have explained previously, my parents were missionaries, Christian missionaries in Pakistan, and they were apparently, as the idea people have of missionaries, is they were trying to bring people to their religion, to convert people to their religion. That really wasn't my parents' main purpose, the way it is of many missionaries. And in fact, my mother clearly believed that other religions were also valid and in fact good paths to God. And she told me once that because I believed, as from the earliest age I can remember, I always used to call on the name of God, the names of God. I always used to be praying to Jesus, especially, please, Jesus, help me do what you would do in this situation. So I was always in that mood or mentality of calling on the name of God, calling on the help of Jesus. And my mother told me that names of God from other traditions are also powerful, they're also beneficial, they also bring the results. So this was a little unusual for a Christian missionary to state this, but that's what she was convinced of, because she was a very intelligent woman and she could see that people from other religions who prayed in the name of God were getting the results just as good, or maybe almost as good, I don't know. She never clarified exactly that, but she certainly said that they were also getting the results from chanting the name of God. So even from my childhood, and especially in my youth, I became fully convinced that all different religious traditions are on the path to God, and I should not think my religion is better than other religions. And I gave up that concept that many Christians have, even as a young person. And I became convinced, in fact, that the purpose of my life, what I wanted to give my life to, was helping people of different religions come together and work together and love each other, and not think that my religion is right and your religion is wrong, so you're going to hell, so I won't, be a friend with you even. So I apologize again if I offended anybody by chanting different prayers and names of God from different traditions all mixed up together, because some people don't like that. So that's okay. I'm sorry that I did that, but I hope you will gradually appreciate, as my mother did, and as I was taught even as a young person, that all sincere people who call on the names of God in their own language, from their own religious tradition, they're also calling, ultimately at least, on the same God as we are. Because really there's only one God, there's only one source of everything, who we can describe as intelligent infinity, or infinite intelligence. I really think that's a very good description. And of course there are many names of God, just like the name of Allah is one of my favorite names because it's universal. It simply means the divinity, and it just makes it very, very clear that there is really just one God, one ultimate source of everything. And as I mentioned yesterday or day before, this problem has been there throughout human history, at least for the last thousands of years of history that we commonly have, where people have kept making the mistake of thinking something else may be God, and people worshipped the moon. We were just looking at the moon earlier in the previous live chat when I was doing the breathing exercises. We could see the last phase of the moon just before the dark moon comes and the new moon comes. So people could see that the moon is a very beautiful thing, and the sun, full of power and light and heat. They worshipped these objects in the sky and stars and things. And they worshipped different objects, like a powerful mountain or the ocean or a fire. In different religious traditions, these things are worshipped. But actually, these are not God. These are simply energies of God that manifest the power of God. But throughout history, for various reasons, people made the mistake of worshiping them, and then they often created in their own imagination some object to worship, some idol. So that is a big mistake. God is God, and God is all-powerful, and these other objects may be very powerful. The sun obviously is very, very powerful, but the power of the sun comes from God, the one original source of everything. So although there may be very good religious traditions in which there are mistakes made, like thinking other things can be God besides the original God, we should not, this is my humble opinion, you may disagree and I may be wrong, but my opinion is that we should love those persons and very, very humbly and kindly try to help them understand the truth and not condemn them and not even harm or kill them, as sometimes people have done, just thinking they're ignorant. Let's just destroy their ignorance by destroying them. That's not a very good idea. So there are many, many mysteries. We should be humble. Being humble is very important. The way to know God is especially through humility. Humility and love. These are probably the two most important characteristics that we need to cultivate, we need to work on developing, so that we really can approach and understand God. So let us all be very, very humble. Let us not think that we can somehow or the other force our will on somebody else, because that's a very immature concept. So I'm going to request everyone, please forgive me for my mistake, but please do not think that the names of God in other religious traditions are bad because it's not my religious tradition. And there may be misunderstandings they have. We also, everyone, all of us have some misunderstandings. So let us all pray and let us all work together cooperatively and lovingly to promote peace and harmony between all people, and pray for understanding, for our own understanding to increase and for others. So I hope you are not afraid that I'm going to spend my whole time now on this sort of theological discussion. I just wanted to clear up that mistake I made yesterday and remind everyone that when we are trying to understand the universe or the cosmos or existence, the most important point to understand is first that all things come from one original source. There's only one God, and we may call him by any name, by the name of Allah, or by the name of Ram, or by the name of Jehovah, or by the name of Tao. There are so many names of God in different traditions, and we should respect and honor them. And just because there may be some misconceptions that the people who chant those names have, doesn't mean that there's something wrong with those names. All right, so I'm going to move on and now from our cosmology section to talk a little bit about history. And I want to focus on one point, and that is I had explained earlier that we have an ancient history on this planet. 2.6 billion years ago were the first intelligent human-like beings on this planet. And people sometimes are astonished at that. It seems to contradict what we have been taught. Yes, of course, we've been taught things that are not, we haven't fully understood, maybe, is the best way to explain it. We have not fully understood. Maybe we've not fully understood what we were taught, or maybe those who taught us did not fully understand. But our history is very, very ancient, and it's very important to understand the secret space programs, because evidence of this very, very ancient race, artifacts of this very, very ancient race, have been discovered, both on this Earth, underneath the surface of the Earth, on the Moon, on Mars, on other star systems also, where the secret space programs have gone. They have discovered these artifacts, or these, they're hard to describe because the technology was so far advanced over ours that they weren't machines like we usually think of. And I just will remind you about that movie 2001 Space Odyssey, in which there was an object which actually in Arthur C. Clarke's novel that the movie was based on, it was a crystal, a large crystal, just a perfect rectangular shape or oblong shape, and in the movie it was made into a solid black object. But in either case, that's because both of those exist. Those crystalline ones are sometimes made out of a type of aluminum. It's very, very permanent, lasts for millions and billions of years, and that's why they still can be found. And sometimes they are black, and sometimes they are translucent, and sometimes they are transparent. But this is a very, very high level of technology which operated, interfaced with consciousness. It didn't require the sort of machinery that we're mostly familiar with today. So I think that the way I'm going to design this history is by moving now into the secret space programs, mainly because all of our information, people keep asking me, how do you know this, how do you know that? A lot of this, practically all of this information about ancient extraterrestrials comes from the secret space program. They have interacted with other beings, extraterrestrials, and they have learned from them their own histories. We, human beings on this planet, have practically lost the histories that were there. There are various reasons for that, but a little bit comes here and there, just like the story of Atlantis or the story of Lemuria. Atlantis was a real place, and in the books, for example, of Plato, it is described as historical incidents and the destruction of Atlantis. So that history has been lost. We don't even know what happened more than a few thousand years ago in any detail. So this information is available in other sources, and especially extraterrestrials who did not undergo those sorts of cataclysms and did not get that loss of knowledge, have this understanding still, and that's where this knowledge comes from. So specifically, the way we're getting it is through those individuals who have gotten in touch with extraterrestrials and have learned from them. So I'm going to return to this secret space program again and again, and I want you to understand this because it's very, very important. And this started really, of course, it's been going on for thousands of years, interactions between powerful extraterrestrial visitors and human beings. But it really was in the 20th century that this interaction reached a new sort of level in which human beings once again attained capacity to travel into space using technologies that were given from extraterrestrial sources or ancient sources. And the most important first point is that the Germans were the first people to understand this, and they did it, interestingly, by channeling. That's how they got their first guidance. So channeling is not accepted very much in modern Western scientific circles, but the Germans, differently than other people, accepted channeling and integrated it with their scientific development. And in some of there were these secret societies in Germany, for example, the Vril Society, VRIL, and the Thule Society, THULE. These secret societies in the earlier part of the 20th century, beginning right after the First World War at least, 1918, 1919 is the earliest dates that we know of when they started doing these channeling practices. And there were individuals, they were mostly women. Maria Orsic was the most famous one, and she would go into a trance, and other people would also go into a trance, and they would speak something which was then understood to be extraterrestrial information. And these channels then provided information that there are sources, there are texts that were written thousands of years ago and are still available in the East. And the Germans developed expeditions to go largely to Tibet, to India, to China in the early part of the 20th century, and they looked for these texts, and they found some texts which actually described machines that could fly and propulsion techniques that would counter gravity, so that these, not like our airplanes today, which can only fly in the air, but they could go outside of the Earth, outside of the atmosphere, and they were anti-gravity craft. They used technologies, and one of them was to used mercury, and by rotating mercury very quickly, very, very fast, and applying a strong electric field that created an anti-gravity effect. So this was one of the first techniques that the Germans developed, based on, again, this sort of esoteric ways of acquiring information through channeling. And then, at one point, the extraterrestrials they were in touch with started appearing and contacting them more directly. And in about 1936, I believe it was, the Germans recovered a crashed extraterrestrial craft, which they then, again with extraterrestrial help, were able to reverse engineer, and they began building what we would call flying saucers today, but maybe not shaped exactly like a saucer, but based on the same principle of anti-gravity and using free energy techniques also, technologies for powering these craft. And the Germans were able, even by the late 1930s and the 1940s, to build craft that could travel to the moon and to planets, other planets, and even to the stars. So this was all kept very, very secret, mainly because these people they were secret societies who had advanced technology, and the Nazi government acquired some of that technology. But these people were not Nazis, actually. They wanted to separate from our entire civilization and create a new civilization or a breakaway civilization where they could pursue their ideals and not be affected by the governments of this world or the limitations of this civilization. And they did succeed in doing that. And before even the end of the Second World War, they had built bases both on this planet and underneath the ground or underneath the ice in Antarctica, and on the moon, and even to other planets. So this again, this information, as I mentioned earlier, there are some very, very good books that have just been published in the last year or two that describe this in great detail. And they talk about the secret colony on Mars, which was then developed by the United States some 3 or 4 decades later. After the Germans were 20, 30, 40 years ahead of the Americans, but the Americans got this information from the Germans after the Second World War by bringing many German scientists to the United States. So that was called Operation Paperclip. It was a CIA operation, as I understand it. And they brought these scientists to America because they realized they have very, very advanced technologies, including space travel, which we don't have. And they also actually had weapons based on what we now would call laser weapons or energy beam weapons or particle beam weapons. And in about 1947, yes, the United States realized that the Germans had created a base in Antarctica. And they got this information, so they sent a very, very large naval fleet under Rear Admiral Byrd, Richard Byrd, to Antarctica to attack this German base. There were battleships, aircraft carriers, destroyers, submarines. It was actually a huge expedition, and it was disguised as being a scientific research expedition, but why all those military ships were necessary could never really be explained fully. But really it was an attack on the German colony or base that had been built. And what happened is, although this again was totally kept secret, was never revealed, although it came out a little bit here and there, that as this flotilla of many, many ships approached Antarctica, these craft came up out of the water. We would call them flying saucers. These craft came up out of the water and they fired on the boats, and there were also aircraft. An aircraft carrier was there, and they shot down some of the planes. They destroyed and sank some of the ships, and they were so fast that the American airplanes, the Air Force craft, could not chase them. They could not shoot them, and they had very advanced technologies, obviously. So Admiral Byrd, although it was originally announced that it was going to last for several months, this so-called scientific expedition returned after just a few weeks, defeated by the Germans. And after that, the American government was in a quandary. They were puzzled as to how we should deal with this. And they finally decided that they would use those German scientists who had been brought to the United States. Wernher von Braun was the most famous one, called the father of American rocketry, because they admitted in our history books about rocketry, but they didn't admit about the anti-gravity craft. So Wernher von Braun and many other of the German scientists were approached by the American government to act as mediators between the German government in Antarctica, the breakaway German government, which had its base in Antarctica. And this is a long history, which I will go into more tomorrow. But the conclusion of it was that the Americans figured, we will infiltrate the Germans. We will use our spies to find out what they're doing. We'll get their technology, and then we will defeat them. This was their plan. Big mistake, because the Germans also had the same idea. They would infiltrate the United States military and government, and actually they did. And what we know today as the cabal or the secret government, that was intimately tied in with these German breakaway civilization forces who had been several decades ahead of any other country in the world in terms of developing this advanced technology and the secret space programs. And is this surprising? I've been talking about it before. Perhaps you'd never heard about this. Information was not available at all. I didn't know all of this, or very much of this information, until just this year or last year is when this information all started coming out by Corey Goode, by Andrew Bashago, by different whistleblowers who themselves were within these secret space programs and have now revealed at great risk to themselves and their families. They have revealed, bravely come forward and revealed this information. So we will end the class now, and I hope you are benefiting from this. I hope you're learning a lot, and I am going to do my own exercises, which I do, and for those that are interested, you can observe me. I won't do that chanting because it offends some people, but anyone who is interested in this, let me just answer here on this video too, since somebody had asked, what did this come from? So this practice of these positions was taught to me by a chiropractor many years ago, a chiropractor who was giving me advice for my health and giving me suggestions for what I should do for my health. He taught me this, the basics of this yoga exercises, you might call them. And then I myself, as I felt inspired, I added more positions. And I haven't done the full exercises. I think I'll do it today, just one time, one cycle. So that's the source of this. And I myself just added those chanting because, as I explained, even from the time I was a child, I always was praying. I always was constantly asking God for guidance. And so I just naturally wanted to pray along with these exercises. So that's why I had those prayers and mantras along with them. It was my own spontaneous desire to do some spiritual activity along with that apparently material activity of the exercises. So I'll conclude this class now, and if you want you can come. I'll come right back on shortly and do the exercises, a little more complete exercises but without the chanting. Thank you very, very much. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow, and we'll have some more information about the transdimensional existence and a little bit more about the history of the secret space programs. Thank you very much.